Don't, I'll buy her. I recognize that strange girl's tattoo. It once saved my life. Snow fell hard that evening, the kind that turned sound to wool and made every breath sting. Callum Graves stood at the edge of the timber yard, his coat open, though the wind bit like steel. The trader's sleigh was half buried in frost, and the men had gathered to watch the scene, half curious, half uneasy. When he spoke, the words came out like something torn from inside him. Don't, I'll buy her. I recognize that strange girl's tattoo. It once saved my life. The trader blinked through the snow, unsure if he had heard right. The woman turned her head, just enough for the lamplight to touch the mark along her shoulder. Small dark circles fading toward her collarbone. It stirred something buried deep in Callum's memory, something from before the cold years, when his world still had color. The trader shrugged, wiping sleet from his beard. You've got silver? Callum pulled a pouch from inside his coat, the coins clinking with a dull finality. The exchange was quick. A handful of metal, a nod, and then she was his. No one spoke after that. The other loggers watched in silence, their faces rough as bark. A few muttered under their breath, not loud enough to carry over the wind. Callum didn't care. He took the chain from the trader's hand, unhooked it, and gestured toward the low-roofed shack near the cookhouse. The woman followed, not out of fear, but because there was nowhere else to go. Inside, the room was small. 2 bunks, a stove, a table. The fire was dying, throwing just enough heat to thaw the top layer of ice from the floorboards. Callum knelt, fed it a few sticks, and let the flames catch. The light flickered against the walls, showing every dent, every old nail, every sign of how long he'd lived without company. He looked back at her. She stood by the door, shoulders drawn tight, eyes on him but unreadable. You'll be safe here, he said quietly. His voice was rough from years of shouting over saws, but softer now. What's your name? She didn't answer, only turned her head slightly toward the fire, the tattoo glimmering in its light. Callum sighed and sat on the edge of the bunk. He'd seen that mark before once when the air was thick and wet, not frozen, and sharp. Years ago in Natal. The woman who'd pulled him from the swamp had that same ink on her skin. She'd said something before slipping away into the trees, something he'd carried like a ghost word in his head ever since. He didn't expect to see it again here, in a land of pine and ice. Outside, the men were laughing, the sound carrying through the thin walls. They'd be talking about him, about the woman, about the madness of buying trouble. Let them. He had more pressing ghosts. She moved toward the fire, slow but sure-footed. Her wrists bore the faint bruises of the chain, but her eyes were steady. Why? She asked at last. Her accent was softened by exhaustion, but the word was clear. He hesitated, feeling suddenly foolish. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try, she said. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. Because someone like you once saved my life. I saw that mark then. I thought I'd imagined it. She studied him a long while, then nodded once and looked back into the fire. You didn't imagine. They said little more that night. She slept on the bunk opposite his, curled under a wool blanket. Callum sat awake, listening to the stove crackle and the wind moan outside. The snow thickened. The river ice would hold by morning, and work would begin again, hauling timber through the drifts, cutting the frozen pines, earning just enough to stay alive. It was a hard life, but it was all he had left. When dawn came, gray and cruel, he found her already awake. She'd cleaned the stove, stacked wood beside it, and stood waiting near the door. He felt a flicker of shame at how she seemed more composed than he was. You can stay, he said quietly. You don't owe me anything. Her expression didn't change. Everyone owes someone something, she said. Then she stepped outside into the snow. He watched her walk toward the cookhouse, where the men were already gathering for breakfast. Their heads turned, the laughter stopped. She moved through them without hesitation, ignoring the looks, the whispers. Callum followed a few paces behind, ready if one of them tried anything. None did. They just stared. The cook, a short man named Baird with a missing thumb, eyed her warily as she stepped in. Who's she? He asked Callum. She works with me, Callum said. Baird raised a brow, but didn't argue. He ladled porridge into a tin bowl and set it down in front of her. She ate slowly as though testing the taste of the place. The men watched, saying nothing. When she finished, she stood, nodded once to Baird, and left. The day's work began. The axes rang against frozen pine, saws screamed in the brittle air, and the sleds groaned as they dragged loads toward the river. Callum worked harder than usual, as if labor could make the situation simpler. He caught glimpses of her now and then, helping near the camp's edge, carrying wood, scrubbing tools, moving like someone used to hardship. By evening the foreman came around, his face red from drink and cold. "Graves," he said, "word is you bought yourself company. That true?" Callum didn't look up from the log he was stripping. "I bought freedom for someone." "That's all," the foreman snorted. "Freedom, eh? You think the boss'll like you bringing strays into camp?" "She ain't from here," Callum's jaw tightened. "Neither am I," the foreman spat into the snow. "Keep her out of trouble, then. The men get ideas, it's on you." He left, and Callum watched the steam of his breath vanish into the cold. The day's light was dying. Across the yard, the woman, he still didn't know her name, was stacking kindling by the cookhouse. He went to her, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "You can't stay in the open when the sun's down," he said. "The cold kills quicker at night." She glanced at him, eyes steady as ever. "You think I fear the cold?" He shook his head. "I think you've had enough of fear." She studied him a moment longer, then followed him back to the shack. The fire was still burning low. He motioned for her to sit, poured a bit of whiskey into 2 tin cups, and handed her one. She sniffed it, cautious, then drank. "What's your name?" He asked again. After a pause, she said, "Namusa." He repeated it under his breath, liking the sound. "Namusa, that means—" "Mercy," she said. "In my tongue," he nodded, silent. The word hung between them, warm as the fire. That night the storm rose again. The wind howled through the pines like some ancient thing remembering loss. Namusa slept lightly, turning at every gust. Callum sat awake, carving the handle of his axe, the knife rasping softly. He thought of the tattoo again, of the woman who'd saved him years ago. Maybe this one was kin to her. Maybe fate had looped back through the cold to remind him of a debt unpaid. He didn't believe in signs, but the thought stayed with him through the long hours until dawn. When morning came, the camp was buried under a new layer of white. Men shoveled paths between shacks, their curses sharp in the frozen air. Namusa was already working beside the river, helping to push the ice off the sled rails. The men avoided her gaze now, not out of respect, but unease. Something about her calm unsettled them. At midday, Callum found her there, sleeves rolled, hands red from the cold. "You don't need to do that," he said. She looked at him. "You bought me." "I work." "I didn't buy you for work." "Then why?" He opened his mouth but found no answer. She waited, saw the silence, and nodded, as if she'd expected it. "No one gives without reason," she said. "You will find yours." That night Callum dreamed of the swamp again, the gunfire, the water thick with blood, the face of the woman with the tattoo. He woke with sweat freezing on his skin and the memory sharper than ever. He looked across the room. Namusa was sitting by the fire, awake, staring into the flames. "You dream loud," she said quietly. "Did I wake you?" "I do not sleep much," she replied. He rubbed his face, trying to chase the ghosts. "You ever see war?" She nodded once. "Too much of it." "Too close." They sat in silence, listening to the fire pop and hiss. Outside the storm had eased, leaving the world still. The sound of the river beneath the ice was faint but steady, like a heartbeat. Callum spoke again, his voice low. "There was a woman once. Looked like you. Had that mark. She saved me. I don't know why." Namusa didn't look at him, just stared into the flame. "Then you owe her, and maybe me," he nodded slowly. "Aye, maybe I do." He said nothing more after that, only watched her profile in the firelight. The flame traced the edge of her cheekbone, caught the fine sweat at her temple. She sat very still, as if any movement might wake something worse than dreams. Outside, a branch scraped the roof, slow and intermittent, like fingers testing the boards. Morning came late, as it always did in that season. The sky stayed a dull iron color long after the bells rang for work. Callum rose with a stiffness in his shoulders that wasn't from labor alone. Namusa was already dressed, the blanket folded at the bunk's foot, boots laced tight. "You don't have to join the men," he said. They don't want you there." She pulled on her coat without looking at him. "I did not come here to be wanted." He watched her tie the scarf at her neck, careful and neat. "If they say anything, they will," she said. "Men always do." She paused then, looked at him with a calm that made him feel unnerved and childish all at once. "If they touch me, that is different. Then you can speak." He opened his mouth to argue, but the bell rang again, sharper now, impatient. The cries of the teamsters rose outside. Sleds creaked, chains clinked, and the smell of horse rose with the cold. Namusa stepped past him and opened the door, a blast of air cutting into the warm dimness. "Stay close to camp," he said to her back. "You stay close to your axe," she replied, and went out into the snow. In the yard, men were already harnessing the horses, breath steaming in thick white plumes. The foreman strode up and down, coat flapping, barking orders through chapped lips. He watched Namusa cross toward the cookhouse and scowled. "We're not running a boarding school, Graves," he muttered as Callum passed. "You keep her out of the way." Callum kept walking. "She'll work where she's needed. She's not on the books," the foreman said. "That's trouble. So am I," Callum said. "You still use my hands." The foreman spat into the snow. "Hands are one thing. She's another." His gaze followed her, sharp and appraising, but there was something like unease there, too. "The men get distracted, there'll be accidents." "Men get stupid," Callum said. "They'll answer to me." The foreman snorted. "You think I can't handle my own yard?" "I think you drink too much to see half of it," Callum said quietly, eyes still on Namusa's back. The foreman's jaw tightened. For a moment Callum thought he might swing at him. Instead, the man shoved his hands deeper into his coat and moved on, shouting about log scales and late hauls. Callum felt the old anger stir in him, the kind that had gotten him in trouble in barracks and dockside taverns alike. He caught it, held it tight, turned it into motion. He took up his axe, felt its weight, and walked toward the stand of frozen pines that waited like a regiment at attention. The day was long even by camp standards. The snow had crusted overnight, hard and slick, and every step was a fight. The saw bucked under his hands, teeth catching in knots frozen like stone. When the great trunks finally leaned and fell, they went down with a slow inevitability, branches cracking like gunfire. He worked next to a man named O'Rourke, a broad Irishman with a nose flattened by too many fights. O'Rourke had opinions on everything, and none stayed in his head. "You really bought her?" O'Rourke panted between pulls on the saw. "I did?" "Christ's teeth," O'Rourke muttered, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. "From that trader?" "He deals in more than furs, that one." "You know where she's from?" "Farther south than you'll ever see," Callum said. O'Rourke grunted. "Oh, not snow country, that's for certain." "She'll break." "She's still standing," Callum said. "Oh, same as us." "That won't stop the lads from trying her," O'Rourke said. There was no malice in his tone, only the bluntness of someone who'd seen too many winters turn men into animals. "You keep her near you, or you'll find someone's blood in the snow." Callum drove the saw harder. "If anyone touches her without her say, that blood will be theirs." O'Rourke glanced at him, measuring something. "You talk like she's your wife." "She's not," Callum said. "She's under my protection." "That's all?" "That's a kind of marriage, too," O'Rourke muttered, but he let it drop. By the time the sun slid behind the black line of the pines, Callum's arms felt like carved wood. The sleds were loaded with their day's work, logs piled high, chains cinched. The teamsters shouted the horses forward, runners hissing on packed snow. Somewhere in that haze of motion and sound, he saw Namusa. She was near the river, helping two boys clear ice from the skids. Her movements were efficient, economical. She had wrapped cloth around her hands, but he could see the reddened skin at her wrists. One of the boys said something to her, some jest, and her mouth flickered, almost a smile, almost not. The sight touched something in him he did not want to examine. Later, in the cookhouse, the air heavy with steam and the smell of boiled meat, the men fell into their usual patterns. Cards came out. Dice clattered. Voices lifted, rough and loud, trying to push back the wilderness that pressed in from all sides. Namusa sat at the far end of a bench, bowl in hand, back straight. Bear dished her stew like any other worker and slammed bread down beside it, pretending not to notice the silence her presence brought. Callum took his bowl and sat opposite her. The men nearest them shifted, giving space, as if afraid some invisible contagion might leap across the table. "You worked hard," Callum said quietly. She ate without looking up. "Work is the same everywhere. The weather changes, that is all." He tore off a piece of bread, chewed. "Where did he buy you from?" The question sounded cruder out loud than it had in his head, but there it was. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes lifted to his, dark and steady. "From a man like you," she said. He had lighter eyes. The words landed heavy. "I'm not—" "No," she said. "You are not him. Or you would not have stopped him." She considered him a moment longer. "But you were like him once. Somewhere else?" He thought of the uniform he'd worn, the orders he'd followed, the villages they'd marched through without seeing faces. He thought of the swamp, the bullets, the hand pulling him from the mud. "Yes," he said finally. "I was like him once." She nodded, as if that confirmed something she had already decided. "Then you understand why I do not trust you yet." "I don't ask you to," he said. The noise in the hall rose around them. Someone slammed a fist on a card table. A song started in the corner, a low mutter at first, then louder as others joined. O'Rourke appeared behind Callum's shoulder, tankard in hand. "You're spoiling everyone's appetite sitting so serious," O'Rourke said. "Tell us, girl, where's home for you?" Nomusa wiped her mouth, set down the spoon, and turned to him. "Home is where I am not hunted," she said. "So not here." Several men laughed, more from discomfort than amusement. O'Rourke raised his tankard in a rough salute. "Fair enough," he said. "You speak better than most bosses I ever had." The tension loosened a fraction. Conversation flowed around them again. Nomusa finished her stew and stood. "Where are you going?" Callum asked. "Your shack," she said simply. "To keep the fire alive. I do not like waking in the cold." He nodded. "I'll be back after I talk with the foreman." She gave a small shrug. The kind that said she did not care what he did as long as he kept his promises. And left. The foreman cornered him near the woodpile outside. "Breath sour with cheap whiskey. I've had word from town," the man said, jabbing a finger toward Callum's chest. "That trader says you cost him a good price. That girl could have fetched more downriver." Callum's jaw tightened. "He was selling a person, not a bolt of cloth," the foreman sneered. "Spare me your bleeding heart. The law doesn't follow so close up here. I don't care where you got her, Graves. I care what trouble she'll bring. Men are already talking about slipping into your shack at night." "They try it," Callum said, voice flat. "There will be corpses to haul come morning." The foreman stepped closer, cheeks flushed. "You think I'm afraid of a has-been soldier with a guilty conscience?" "No," Callum said. "I think you're afraid of losing control of your camp." For a moment their faces were inches apart, breath steaming between them. Then the foreman laughed, a dry bark. "You know what scares me," he said. "It's not you. It's that mark on her shoulder. I saw another like it once, years back, on a man down south. He carried it like a flag and swore he'd kill every white he saw. Maybe she's kin. Maybe not. But I don't want that kind of trouble here." Callum's heart thudded once, hard. "What was his name?" "Hell if I remember," the foreman said. "Zulu names all sound like stones dropping in a river to me. But he had eyes like hers, like he'd already lost everything worth losing." The foreman shoved past him then, muttering about ledger books and quotas. Callum stood in the cold a long moment, listening to his own breath. The idea that someone else had recognized the mark, had seen it and lived, shook him. This was no coincidence then, no strange trick of memory. The ink on Nomusa's skin traveled farther than armies. Back in the shack, the fire was a steady glow. Nomusa sat cross-legged on the floor, palms toward the stove, warming her hands. She looked up as he entered. "You were gone long," she said. "Talking to a fool," he replied, shrugging off his coat. He's seen that mark before. "On a man, down south, carrying war in his mouth." She watched him carefully. "Many carry it," she said. "It is not just ink. It is a promise." He sat on the bunk, leaned his forearms on his knees. "Oh, what does it promise?" She thought a long while before answering. "That we remember." The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the room. "Remember what?" he asked. "Land," she said. "Names, children taken, fires in the night. Men like you." Her gaze didn't waver. "You say someone with this mark saved you. Maybe that was his way of remembering too." He searched her face for anger, found something colder, more durable. "Does the mark mean you hate me?" he asked. She seemed almost surprised by the question. "I do not know you yet." "That's not an answer." It is the only one I have, she said, turning back to the stove. Hatred takes shape over time, like ice. He lay back on the bunk, staring at the low ceiling. The wood above him was darkened by years of smoke, knots like eyes. He listened to the small clicks of the fire, the distant muffled songs from the cookhouse fading one by one as men stumbled to their beds. The world outside was still. The forest held its breath. The days that followed settled into a pattern. Callum worked the timber stands from dawn until the sky bruised purple, arms aching, lungs burning cold. Nomusa turned herself into something the camp could not easily cast out. She hauled water, scrubbed clothes until her knuckles cracked, learned where Baird kept extra flour and when he might trade a loaf for an hour's help. She found the rhythm of the place faster than many men who'd come north, yet she never joined their games. When cards came out, she withdrew to a corner, back against the wall, eyes half closed. When songs started, she listened, but did not sing. The men grew used to her presence the way they grew used to the stove's heat or the sting of the wind. A constant to work around, not something they owned. Still, there were moments when their talk darkened. One night, Callum stepped outside his shack to piss and caught low voices near the wood line. 3 silhouettes huddled there, shoulders hunched against the cold, speaking with the furtive heat of men planning something stupid. "She's alone when he's out," one voice said. "He can't watch her all the time." "I heard she sleeps with a knife," another muttered. "You want your guts on the floor?" "That kind has no bite without their people," a third replied. "Up here it's just her. Besides, a woman's a woman in the dark." Callum walked toward them, boots crunching on the snow. They fell silent as soon as they heard his steps. The nearest one, a thin-faced man named Jurgens, straightened, mouth already curling. "Evening? Graves," Jurgens said. "We were just having a smoke. In the trees, like wolves?" Callum asked. "You planning to howl next?" Jurgens stepped closer, the tobacco reek on his breath, fighting the cold. "Camp talk says you bought yourself more than a worker. You can't keep something like that to yourself forever." Callum studied him, slow and level. "You're welcome to try," he said quietly. "Come to the shack in the night. See how many of you walk away." Another of the men shifted his weight, unease flickering. "We don't mean harm, Graves. It's lonely up here, you know that." "I know what men call loneliness when they want an excuse," Callum said. "Listen to me now. She is under my roof, under my protection. Any man who crosses that line will answer to me before God has the chance." Jurgens laughed, but it wobbled at the edges. "You think you can fight the whole camp?" "If I have to," Callum said. "I've fought worse odds with less reason." For a moment, something like respect sparked in Jurgens' eyes, then vanished under the usual sneer. "You bring strange trouble here, Graves. Don't cry when it turns on you." They melted back toward the bunkhouses, muttering. Callum stood in the cold long after their shadows were gone, listening to the trees creak. The forest always sounded on the edge of speech on such nights, as if it wanted to warn them of something but could not find the right tongue. Inside, Nomusa was mending a shirt by the fire, needle flashing in the dim light. She looked up as he entered. "You smell like anger," she said. "3 idiots were thinking about your bed," he replied flatly. "I guessed as much," she said, knotting the thread. "Thank you for making them think again." He dropped onto the bunk opposite her. "You don't seem surprised. I have lived around men," she said. "This is not new." He watched her hands, deft and sure despite the cracks on her fingers. "It should be," he said. She looked at him, head tilting slightly. "You keep talking of should." "The world does not know that word." He leaned back, exhausted beyond words. The shadows on the walls seemed longer that night, reaching toward the ceiling beams. "Tell me about the woman who saved you," Nomusa said suddenly. "The one with my mark." He stared up at the dark boards. "It was near the Tugela River. The ground was mud and blood. We were chasing men who knew the land better than we ever would. They led us into a swamp, let us sink and shoot ourselves blind. I took a bullet in the leg, fell, thought that was it." The memory rose sharp and hot, cutting through the northern cold. The smell of rot and gunpowder, the screaming horses, the sudden silence afterward. "I remember hands under my arms," he continued, pulling me out of the muck. I swung, thought it was an enemy, but she was unarmed. Just mud and a mark on her shoulder, like yours. She dragged me behind a fallen tree, pressed rags to my leg. She said something. A word I never forgot. He spoke it then, clumsy in his mouth, the syllables roughened by years away from that heat. Nomusa's eyes widened slightly. You remember well, she said. I never knew what it meant, he admitted. Promise, she said. It means promise, he swallowed. She promised me something? No, Nomusa replied. You did. Without knowing, he frowned. How could I promise anything? I couldn't even stand. You lived, she said simply. Sometimes that is enough of a promise. The fire crackled softly, sending small sparks up the iron throat of the stove. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint rush of the buried river under the ice outside, carrying its cold burden toward distant seas. The first real accident came 3 weeks later, just after midday, when a misjudged cut sent a pine falling in the wrong direction. The tree was old, bark blackened by lightning years before, its heart half-rotten and unpredictable. The men warned the rookie swingman about its lean, but he was eager to prove himself and deaf to sense. Callum heard the wrong crack, that sickening twist in the air, and shouted without thinking, Downhill! Move, you idiots, most did. One didn't. The trunk pivoted as it fell, caught by another tree, then spun like a drunk giant changing its mind. O'Rourke slipped on the ice, boots shooting out from under him. For a heartbeat he lay there, stunned, staring up at the mass of wood hurtling toward him. Callum ran. Time slowed as it does in those moments when death shows its full size. He felt his lungs burn, legs pounding, snow exploding with each stride. He reached O'Rourke and threw himself sideways, catching the man's coat, hauling with everything left in his shoulders. The tree hit ground where O'Rourke's legs had been a breath before. The impact shook the earth. A branch caught Callum's calf, tearing flesh through wool. Pain flared hot, then went strange and distant. He lay there, chest heaving, snow filling his mouth. O'Rourke's wide eyes stared into his, realization dawning. Christ, Graves, O'Rourke gasped. You've got death by the throat. It's got mine, Callum muttered, trying to sit. Blood soaked into the drift beneath his leg, melting it to slush. Men swarmed around them, voices overlapping. Someone cursed the rookie. Someone else called for a stretcher. The foreman appeared, face white under the winter burn. Get him to camp, he barked. We can't spare another hand. The journey back was a jolt of pain and sky, faces leaning over him, pine branches rattling overhead. In the haze he saw another face, darker against the light, eyes steady, Nomusa. By the time they hauled him into the shack, she had water heating and bandages laid out. Baird hovered with a bottle of whiskey and a needle blackened in the fire. The foreman looked impatient, like a man losing coin each time Callum groaned. The branch missed the bone, Baird said, cutting away the trouser leg. Lucky bastard? Luck is what you call other men's pain, Nomusa said calmly, examining the wound. Hold him. I've done my own stitching, Callum said through clenched teeth. Not this time, she replied. You will faint before the second knot. You have already lost blood. He wanted to argue, but the room tilted. He gripped the edge of the bunk instead. Baird poured whiskey over the gash. Fire tore up his leg. He swore, the sound dragged from somewhere deep in his chest. Drink, Nomusa said, pressing the bottle to his lips. He took a mouthful, coughed, swallowed. She threaded the needle with steady fingers, ignoring Baird's doubtful glance. You know what you're doing? The cook asked. She didn't answer him. Instead, she spoke to Callum, words low and even. Breathe like this, she said, demonstrating with her own chest. Slow in, slower out. Watch my face, not your leg, he locked his eyes on hers. The first stab of the needle felt like fire driven into bone. He sucked in air, knuckles whitening on the blanket. She worked quickly, efficiently. Hand sure, movements economical. Each pull of the thread drew wound to wound, skin to skin, closing what the tree had opened. You learned that in war? He ground out. In too many places, she said. Do not talk. Breathe. The foreman lingered near the door, impatience shadowed now by something darker. How long until he's back on his feet? He demanded. Nomusa didn't look up from her work. If he rests 4 days. If he is foolish, 2. We don't have 4 days, the foreman snapped. Then you will have a man who walks like broken timber for the rest of his life, she said. You choose. Callum almost laughed, but the needle bit again and strangled it in his throat. Baird hid a smile behind the whiskey bottle. The foreman glared, weighed his options, then spat on the floor. 2 days, he growled. After that, he earns his pay. He slammed the door behind him. When the last knot was tied, Namusa sat back on her heels, face shining with sweat. The wound was ugly but clean, edges neat as a mended seam. You see? Baird said, shaking his head in grudging awe. Patchwork like a tailor. Namusa rose, wiped her hands on a rag, and turned to the cook. Boil more water, she ordered. Bring food that is not just fat. He needs strength. I don't take orders in my kitchen, Baird grumbled automatically, but he was already reaching for the pot. The pain dulled to a heavy throb as the daylight outside faded. Callum drifted in and out, mind slipping south unbidden, back to mud and blood, to another pair of hands stitching his skin under foreign stars. Each time he surfaced, Namusa was there, checking the bandage, adjusting the blanket, counting his breaths without touching him. At some point in the night, when the wind outside rose and snow hissed against the shack walls, he woke to find her sitting on the floor, back against the stove, eyes closed. Not asleep, just resting in that watchful way she had. You could let someone else watch me, he murmured. Who? She asked without opening her eyes. The men who want my bed? The boss who wants your hands more than your life? He swallowed dryly. O'Rourke might. He is grateful, she said. Gratitude fades faster than hunger. He considered that. Why did you really help me? He asked. Today, with the stitching. You could have let them try and fail. She opened her eyes then, looked at him for a long moment. If you die, she said simply, my debt to the woman with my mark dies with you. I am not ready for that yet. You believe I owe her, he said. And you're here to collect. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I am here because the world is cruel, and sometimes we must make small kindnesses pay interest. Her gaze softened a fraction. Sleep, Callum Graves. Your leg will hurt enough tomorrow. He drifted down again, into a darkness filled with snow and mud and the strange comfort of a voice that did not belong to this land, and yet anchored him in it. All right, here's the story continuing directly. No interruptions. The next morning light came thin and blue through the cracks. The air smelled of iron and pine smoke. Callum tried to move and hissed as the bandage pulled. The fire had burned low. Namusa was gone. For a moment he thought she'd vanished back into whatever world had thrown her into his, but then the door opened, and she stepped in carrying a bucket that steamed in the cold. You're awake, she said. Good. Drink this. He took the tin cup she poured, bitter broth heavy with herbs. Tastes like bark, he muttered. It is bark, she said, and began to lay more wood on the fire. For fever, he drank it all, grimacing. The warmth hit his stomach like small fire. He lay back and watched her move about the room, precise, unhurried, each motion clean as the sound of her voice. How long? He asked. 2 days if you are stubborn, she said. 4 if you are wise. Never been called wise, he said. I can see that. She sat opposite him. You risked your life for that man? Why? Callum stared at the boards above. Because I couldn't not. That is not an answer. No, he said. But it's the truth. She studied him for a while, then began to grind something in a small wooden bowl. The smell of crushed pine and smoke filled the room. Men who run toward falling trees do not live long, she said. Maybe not, he said. But they sleep better. Outside, the sound of saws started again. The world carried on, indifferent. He dozed in and out through the morning, waking to the sound of her quiet humming, low and tuneless, as she cleaned the floor and tended the fire. When the sun was high, the door opened again, and O'Rourke ducked in, beard rimed with frost. You look half dead, Graves. Better than none, Callum said. O'Rourke set down a loaf of bread and a chunk of smoked meat. Brought this before Baird feeds it to the dogs. The foreman's got your pay docked for the days you're out. Figured I'd tell you before he sends his man for the axe. Callum nodded. Let him dock. I'm still breathing, O'Rourke grinned. Barely. You owe the lady your leg, Namusa glanced up. He owes me nothing, O'Rourke held up his hands. Didn't mean offense, just saying you've got skill, she turned back to her work. Skill keeps people alive, that is all. When O'Rourke left, Callum sank deeper into the blanket. The pain dulled but never left entirely. He watched the fire for hours, the orange light painting the walls with slow movement. That night, a blizzard came from the north. It started as fine dust, then thickened until the world vanished outside the window. The wind howled through the cracks like a living thing. Callum drifted in and out of fever. Each time he woke, Namusa was there, sometimes by the stove, sometimes sitting near the door, face lit by the faint glow. "Why are you still here?" he asked once, voice raw. She looked at him steadily. "Because the wind sounds like the sea tonight. I do not like to hear it alone." He closed his eyes, listening. It did sound like water, endless, unseen, moving through dark. He remembered ships, distant harbors, the faces of men long gone. By morning the storm had buried the camp. No work that day. The men dug paths between the bunkhouses like trenches. The foreman raged, but the world paid him no mind. Callum tried to stand and almost fell. Namusa caught his arm. "You are not ready," she said. "I can't lie here forever. You can for one more day." He let her guide him back to the bunk. Her hand was steady, strong. When she pulled the blanket over him, he felt the warmth of her wrist against his face. It lingered longer than necessary. In the days that followed, the camp became its own world, cut off, self-contained, the forest wrapped tight around it. Callum walked again, limping through the drifts, testing his strength. The men nodded to him with the wary respect given to one who's nearly died, and returned. O'Rourke joked less. The foreman watched him with something like suspicion. Namusa took to walking the river path at dusk. Callum often found her there, standing on the ice, staring south as if she could see through snow and time. One evening he joined her. "You'll fall through if you stand too long," he said. "Then I will swim," she said softly. He smiled. "Cold water. Hard way to leave." "Better than chains," she said. They stood in silence. The last light turned the snow blue. Her scarf fluttered in the wind, and for a moment he saw again the mark on her shoulder, dark against skin, curved like a story unfinished. "What did you promise?" he asked suddenly. She didn't look at him. "That I would carry the memory until someone else could not." "Someone else?" "The woman you spoke of," she said. "She was my sister." The world seemed to tilt. "Your sister?" "Yes, she saved you." "And died for it," he swallowed. The wind stung his eyes. "I didn't know." "She knew enough," Namusa said. "She said there was something in your eyes that was not like the others." "Maybe she was wrong, maybe she wasn't," he said. For a long time, neither spoke. The light faded. When they turned back toward camp, the first flakes began to fall again, small and slow, as if the sky were thinking. That night, he dreamed of her sister's face again, clear now, framed by heat and mud. The same eyes, the same mark. When he woke, Namusa was asleep on the floor beside the stove, her breathing deep and even. The world outside was quiet. He sat there in the dim glow, watching the fire shrink, listening to the crackle and the faint whistle of wind through the seams. Somewhere beyond the walls, wolves howled long, low, answering each other across the frozen distance. He thought of debts, of promises, of the weight of one life taken from another. He thought of mercy and of the cold that never truly left a man once it got in. The next day the foreman came again, face gray, eyes bloodshot. "Town courier came through," he said. "Wants a load hauled south tomorrow. You're fit to travel?" "I can handle a team," Callum said. "Good. Take the woman." "The road'll freeze hard tonight. Easier with two." "Drop the logs. Bring back supplies." Callum glanced at Namusa. She stood behind him, silent, watching. "Fine," he said. The foreman smirked. "Try not to lose her. Traders down there pay good for her kind." Callum's hands curled. "Say that again." The foreman stepped back, grin fading. "Just mind your temper, Graves. The South doesn't forget." He left. Callum turned to Namusa. "You don't have to come." "I will," she said. "You might need someone who remembers the way back." At dawn they set out. The sled groaned under its load, horses snorting steam into the cold air. The road wound through black pine and white silence, the sound of hooves muffled under fresh snow. Namusa sat beside him, cloak drawn tight, eyes on the horizon. "Ever been south from here?" he asked. "No," she said. "But I have been north far enough to know it is all the same." They rode in silence. The trees thinned, opening to a frozen valley. Smoke rose far off, a town, small and hard-looking. He felt her stiffen beside him. "What is it?" he asked. "Men who smell of iron," she said. "I know that smell," he said, nothing. The horses plodded on, heads down. By the time they reached the yard at the edge of town, the sun was sinking. A trader came out, the same kind of man Callum had dealt with before, fur collar, red face, eyes small and sharp. "Graves," he said. "Didn't think you'd make it through that pass." "Bring the timber?" "In the sled. Good. Offload here." "Payment inside." The man's gaze slid past him to Namusa. "And what's this?" "Camp help?" Callum stepped down. "She's with me, lucky man," the trader said, smirking. "Ain't often we see that kind this far north." Namusa met his stare without flinching. "Some things travel farther than you wish," the trader chuckled uneasily. "Well, you'll find folk here less." "Sentimental." Callum's voice was quiet. "She's not for sale. Never said she was." The man's grin widened, false as thaw water. "But if you change your mind," he didn't finish. Callum's fist hit him square in the jaw. The sound was short and final. The man staggered back, eyes wide, hand to his mouth. Namusa stood still, watching. "Now you will have trouble," she said. "Wouldn't be the first time," Callum said. They left the sled at the yard and walked into town to find supplies. Every step drew eyes, some curious, some hostile. The place smelled of smoke and iron, the streets narrow, the snow churned gray by boots. At the blacksmith's, Callum bought nails, oil, new straps. The smith eyed Namusa, said nothing, only weighed the coin slow before dropping them into his till. When they were done, night had fallen. The only lodging was a single inn by the river. Inside, the air was warm but tense. Conversations died when they entered. The innkeeper, a broad woman with flour on her sleeves, looked from Callum to Namusa. "2 rooms?" "1," Callum said. Namusa said nothing. The woman hesitated, then nodded toward the back. "Upstairs, last door. Pay first." He laid coins on the counter. They climbed the narrow steps, the wood creaking under their boots. The room was small, 1 bed, a stove, a cracked window. He dropped the pack and sat on the chair. Namusa stood by the window, looking out at the river. "They will come tonight," she said. "I know. Why?" "Because I hit the wrong man," he said. She turned to him. "No, you hit the right one." "That is why they will come," he smiled faintly. "You sound like a soldier." "I sound like my sister," she said. He loaded his revolver, checked the cylinder, set it on the table. "Get some rest." "I will stay awake," she said. "So will I." Outside, the river cracked under ice. Footsteps passed in the street below. Somewhere a door slammed, then silence. When it came fast. A thud against the door, wood splintering. Callum was already moving, gun raised. 2 men burst in, faces half covered with scarves. He fired once, the flash lighting the room. One fell, the other lunged with a knife. Namusa caught his arm, twisted, drove her elbow into his throat. He dropped soundlessly. Smoke hung in the room. Callum reloaded. Namusa stared at the bodies, then at him. "You still think the past doesn't follow?" she said. He holstered the gun. "Seems it's catching up fine," downstairs voices shouted. More feet on the steps. Callum crossed to the window, looked out. The river below glinted with thin ice. "No good way out," he said. Namusa moved beside him. "There is always a way." She kicked the stove, sending embers across the floor. The dry rug caught, fire blooming fast. "Now," she said, and climbed through the window onto the roof. He followed, heat licking at his boots. They slid down the snow-slick shingles, dropped into the alley, and ran toward the river. The shouts rose behind them. Firelight spilled from the windows. The night turned orange. At the bank, Callum hesitated. "It won't hold." Namusa stepped onto the ice, looked back. "Then run fast." They ran. Behind them, the building groaned, flames twisting into the wind. The ice cracked under their weight, water whispering below. Halfway across, Callum heard the gunshot. He turned, saw a figure at the shore. Another shot. Namusa stumbled, caught herself. "Go!" she said. He caught her arm, dragged her forward. The ice gave way beneath them with a sound like thunder. Cold swallowed the world. He came up gasping, hands clawing for purchase. The current pulled hard under the broken surface. He caught her wrist, pulled, kicked, felt nothing but dark water and the ache of air running out. Then his hand found ice again. He heaved them both onto the edge, rolling clear of the hole. She coughed, shivering, blood dark on her sleeve. He tore off his coat, wrapped it around her, held her close as the cold bit into them. The fire on the far bank burned bright against the night. The town shrank behind them, its shouts fading with the wind. Ahead lay forest, endless and dark. He looked at her face. Her eyes were half closed, breath shallow. "Stay with me," he said. "I am here," she whispered. For now." He lifted her, cradling her against his chest, and started toward the trees. The snow swallowed their footprints as they went, and the river closed behind them, still moving under its skin of ice. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.